morning. So good to see you and hear you this morning, and we're very excited for today's plenary. I want to and proudly introduce our speaker, Monica Ray Simpson. Monica is a queer, Black, North Carolina native who has organized extensively against human rights abuse, the prison industry, racism, and systemic violence against Southern Black women and LGBTQ people. Monica is a proud graduate of the historically Black Johnson C. Smith University, having earned a bachelor's in communication and organized for LGBTQ rights on and off campus. She has served as the operations director for the first person of color at the Charlotte Lesbian and Gay Community Center. She's also trained Black youth in activism, philanthropy, and fundraising as the Ujamaa coordinator for grassroots leadership. In 2010, she moved to Georgia to be development coordinator, then promoted to be coordinator in 2011, interim director in 2012, and now the executive director. Monica is a nationally sought after facilitator, speaker, and organizer. She's often called upon to travel the country for various appearances, having served as the founder of Charlotte's North Carolina Black Gay Pride Celebration, the first in the Bible Belt. She has been a facilitator in facilitating recipient of the award from the National Black Justice Coalition and the Human Rights Coalition for its incredible launch with 7,000 participants. She's been featured in many publications for her activism and has written articles on LGBTQ issues, RJ, over policing of Black and Brown communities, philanthropy, and Southern activism. She was named the new civil rights leader by Essence magazine in 2014, and 2015 was chosen as a panelist for the Women of the World Summit. She's also a full circle doula, certified through the International Center for Traditional Childbirth. She serves on the board of the Fund for Southern Communities and the legendary Highlander Center. Many of you already know she's a singer, a spoken word artist. She infuses her art with her activism. She's also appeared in theatrical productions such as For the Love of Harlem, Words the Isms, Walk Like a Man, The Vagina Monologues, and For Color Girls. She's also released a solo album, Revolutionary Love, in 2015, and she's performed at events across the country, including singing the national anthem and the national Black anthem for the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. March and Rally in Atlanta, Georgia. Monica created Artists United for Reproductive Justice as a project of Sister Song in order to create a platform for artists to collaborate or replicable artwork that furthers the reproductive justice movement. And without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce to you our plenary speaker, Monica Simpson.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, and peace to each and every one of you. I am just overjoyed over here and also working on these little locks, but very overjoyed to be in this space and to be able to see your faces and to experience convocation, even in this small way with you all. It is such a blessing. I miss so many of you, and I can't believe I get to be here to talk about my life's work with you today. I really count it an honor. So thank y'all for including me. Convocation, man, I still remember my first convocation in LA many, many years ago, it feels like now. And I can still feel the energy. I can still feel like all the connections that were made in that space. It was an absolutely life-changing experience for me. Being a part of this movement and having it as my foundation as a young leader, as a person that has grown in this social justice movement, has absolutely changed the way that I do my work. And, you know, the mantra of this movement, that God is love and love is for everyone, has become my life's mantra. And so it feels like a homecoming to me in a lot of ways. And so I'm really trying to keep my excitement down as much as I can to get through the work. But I really am really pumped to be here. I also want to take a moment to just give honor and respect to Archbishop Carl Bean, his legacy, his leadership, his unconditional love that lives on through all of us. I am so honored that I had the opportunity to meet this incredible giant of a human being, that I had the opportunity to learn from him, to sit under his leadership. And I know that his legacy will live on again through all of us, forever, forever. And so today, good folks, I am here to talk about what has become my life's work. And I know that the theme of this convocation is really centered around democracy. And social justice work has been something that has been my life's work for a very long time. But over the past 10 years, I've really moved into doing a very specific piece of this work that I'm really excited to bring to you all today. And that's a conversation around reproductive justice and how I feel that it is absolutely the pathway to our collective freedom. And so as a person that's been doing this work for over 20 years, I've done work from LGBTQ liberation to working to dismantle private prisons and immigrant detention centers. I'm doing civil rights work, and across all of those different movements, as I've done that work over the years, at some point, there was a piece of my identity that came into question or was ignored, right? As I was doing LGBTQ work, the conversations around race just was, the tension there was just way too much sometimes. As I was doing work around abolishing for-profit private prisons and really doing prison abolition work, there wasn't a lot of conversation around gender and how to really bring in the intersections of LGBTQ liberation even into that conversation. As I was doing work, around civil rights, trying to bring in LGBTQ work, trying to bring in the gender lens was just still a hard thing to contend with it sometimes. But it was still work that was incredibly important to me. So I was like, I'm gonna keep doing this work, but something feels like it is missing. And I could not quite put my finger on what that was until I went to the US Social Forum in 2004. And at the US Social Forum in 2004 that was held here in Atlanta, Georgia, I was introduced to this concept of the reproductive justice framework and the reproductive justice movement. I still remember seeing this incredible leader. Her name is Loretta Ross. She's one of the founding mothers of this movement. As this Black woman speaking about what it looks like to talk about social justice in connection to our bodies, in connection to bodily autonomy, in connection to our sexual and reproductive health. And this was the first time that I ever heard anybody talk about the intersections of this work in this way. And I was absolutely hooked at that moment. And it was work that I knew that I wanted to get to know more and I wanted to become closer to. What I learned in that conversation from Loretta Ross was that Black women created a movement in 1994 known as reproductive justice as a national response to healthcare reform. And I know that many of you can really think back to 1994, right? 94 was an incredible year in terms of policy at the federal and global level. We were in the midst of healthcare reform in this country. There was the conversations around the crime bill on the table. At the global level, there were huge conversations around women's health. And so this was an extremely pivotal year for us, especially as Black folks and folks of color in this country, as we were talking about some of the most important topics of our life, right? And these Black women knew that was going on. And they realized that if we were going to talk about healthcare, if we were going to talk about, what democracy should look like for us in that time, that it was important for us to center reproductive health in a way that did not exclude some of the most critical healthcare that was necessary for our communities, which absolutely included abortion access to contraception, and all that we needed to make sure that our children were getting access to the comprehensive sex education that they needed, right? And so these women call themselves Women of African Descent for Reproductive Justice, which is the first time that term was ever used. And they did a call out to Congress. They actually put an ad in the Washington Post, right, that was signed on by over 800 Black women across the country that basically told Congress that if you're going to talk about healthcare reform, you are going to listen to Black women and you are not going to exclude all the necessary parts of healthcare, which absolutely includes reproductive healthcare in that conversation. It was a bold action. This was before social media and Twitter and all the things that we have now that help connect us. And so it took a lot of organizing for these Black women to move this level of organizing at the federal level, and that actually put Congress on notice at that time. And so because of that work, the reproductive justice movement was born. And I can't help but think about the ways that Black women in particular over the years have had to create these cultural interventions, these moments where we have to respond immediately to what is happening in our communities. These Black women did it in 1994. Alicia Garza and Opal and Patrice did that in 2014. Tarana Burke did that just a couple of years ago with Me Too. So I just want to give honor to what Black women have had to do over the years to ensure that our bodies, that our families, that our communities were safe. And this movement is in alignment with all of that work that has really been birthed by Black women in this country. Now, social justice movements have always focused on the needs of the people, right? Like all of us on this call, we are all deeply rooted and connected, to ensuring that we are living in a world that allows us to be who we want to be and to be able to be as free as we want to be in this country, right? Our social justice movements has focused on our ability to vote, our right to have a livable wage, a clean planet, the right for us to be able to marry and love who we want to. But what I feel is important about the reproductive justice movement is that it takes this work a step further by rooting our work in the human rights framework, right, which gives us the global connections that are super necessary, in my opinion, for us to really build the collective power that we need. And by focusing on the intersections of our lives, this work really creates an opportunity for us to take a holistic approach to our liberation. Now, why that's important, right? Now, it's important because, it's great to be able to marry who you love, but if your job only pays you 64 cents on the dollar as a Black woman, which is not enough to create a family, then where is the justice there? And if your community doesn't feel safe for your children to play on the playground with their toys like Tamir was doing, then where is the justice there? And if you can't live into your dream to have the children that you want, like Breonna Taylor so beautifully said in a tweet before she was taken from us, then where is the justice? And if you are not believed by medical professionals when you tell them that the pain is too much when you were in childbirth like Serena did, then where is the justice, right? That is how reproductive justice brings all of our work together. And so we define reproductive justice as the human right to, one, have the children that we want in the ways that we want. We are adamant about talking about the fact that the medical industrial complex is not the safest place, right, for us in this country. And we can look at all the historical reference as to why that is the case. But in terms of childbirth in this country, we know that Black women are dying way more than white women in childbirth. And the fact that Black women are not listened to is absolutely just not okay on all the levels, right? So we really push for birth justice with, bringing back our midwives, our doulas, bringing back all of the different ways that we have historically and culturally taken care of our own selves and our communities to ensure that we are bringing our children into the world in the healthiest and safest of ways. We also define reproductive justice, number 2, as a way to prevent and end pregnancies with dignity and without shame. This is where we get to talk about abortion access. This is where we get to talk about access to contraception, whether that is using medicine to do that, or whether that's using the natural ways that our bodies are also designed to be able to do what they need to do, right? Reproductive justice is defined 3 as the human right to to parent the children that we have in healthy and safe environments, which means that our environments need to have clean water, and we don't need food deserts, and that we don't need bullets from police guns driving themselves into our communities. That is what it means for us to have healthy and safe communities for our children, for our families, for all of us to thrive in. And lastly, we define reproductive justice as the human right to bodily autonomy. And so our human right to self-determine our own futures, right? This tenet takes us beyond the womb-centeredness, right, of this work, which is absolutely about us being able to bring the children that we want into the world, or to be able to prevent or end whatever we need for our wombs. But it ensures that we can live in a world where we are safe and we have access to all that we need to create the lives that we want. I don't know if y'all know it by now, but I love this work, right? I could talk about this work all day because I do feel like it is some of the most important work for our democracy right now, because this is where we are the most under attack, right? Again, Black women are dying at a rate 4 times higher than white women in childbirth. Like, we are one of the most developed countries in the world, but our maternal mortality rates are rising more than some of the most underdeveloped countries in this world. That says a lot about who we are as a country, and it says a lot about this medical industrial complex that we are forced, right, to have to interact with daily. Also, abortion bans are taking over and taking us back decades, right? So I know that many of you probably have heard in the news about what has happened in Texas, even though we had a little breakthrough, thank goodness, with the judge being able to pull back on some of the work, the SB 8, which was basically an abortion ban, which demolished abortions in the state of Texas. And we have been on the ground with our folks there. We just finished a national day of action on October 2nd around these abortion bans. We had to fight one up with our own state house here in Georgia, where they are determined to reverse Roe v. Wade, right? And for folks of color, we know that Roe v. Wade has always been the bare minimum for us, but it is something that we have been able to stand firm on to ensure that we do have access to safe and legal abortions in this country. And let me tell you all, this work around abortion access, I know that for some folks, they're like, well, I've never had an abortion, or I don't think I'm going to have an abortion. Well, I'm an LGBTQ person. I don't know if that's really something I'm going to come in contact with. I really want to just smash all of those myths and stigmas right here on this day today, because what I believe is true is that we all, most of us, right, if not all of us, know and love someone who has had an abortion. And we know and love someone who's had an abortion that has been life-changing for them, right? And so this work is important for all of us. Also, the fight for abortion access is a fight against white supremacy in this country, right? They have used abortion access in this country for decades to divide and conquer. They've used it for decades to push harmful legislation through our state houses all the way up to the federal level. And so if we're not looking at this, not just as a service that folks need to have access to, but that we look at it as a part of the democracy that we're all committed to, then we have to see all the connections there. And so even if you've never had an abortion, I'm actually someone who's never had an abortion, but I am absolutely on the front lines of this work because I know how incredibly important it is for our communities to be able to have access to what they need, to be able to make the decisions that they need for themselves, and again, to create their own futures. And so I also think it's important for our male allies in this conversation to understand like how important it is to also be supportive of this work of reproductive justice, right? And how important it is for them to be on the front lines of this work for us too. Because what this gendered part of this conversation can get really, really, really hard and very challenging. But what is real is that we have so many men who are starting to now enter into this conversation because they realize that the more that they can step in and actually be a voice against those men who are in these positions of power, in particular at our state houses and at the federal level, that we need men to be able to speak to those men who are trying to move forward those harmful policies. So what is real, good people, is that we are losing children right now. I mean, what is so hard to like do in this work and to have to grapple with every single day is that, you know, our children are under attack. You know, we are living in the midst of a global pandemic that's impacting Black and brown bodies the most. And so for me, this just all brings us back to this notion that it is absolutely time for us all to see reproductive justice as an important part of our work that we all need to be connected to. Because what's real is that LGBTQ folks, we create families. All of us got our families, right? We are having babies. We are also having abortions. We are using contraception for a myriad of issues. And we are definitely having sex. All of these things are happening, right, in our community. And so if we're looking at that and we know that that is a part of our lives, then we have to see all of us have to see ourselves connected to this work and this absolute necessary time for us to be connected to this movement for reproductive justice. Now, I want to bring in this other piece of the conversation around this because it was really, really important for me when coming to this work to talk about the healing aspect of the reproductive justice movement. Because a lot of these issues around our bodies, around sex, around childbirth, around birthing, all of the things, unfortunately brings up a lot of trauma for folks. And what I didn't even realize when I came into this movement was so much of my own story around my body that I had just pushed to the bottom and did not feel like I had to deal with. And it wasn't until coming to this work that I was able to have the safe space, right, to be able to really contend with some of the things I had been dealing with. Even in the church, I didn't feel like I could talk about these issues I was having around my sexual assault, you know, surviving sexual assault, to dealing with the feelings of guilt and shame of decisions made in the past. Like those were things I just did not think I could have in I could be in conversation around, even in the church, because as I grew up, right, the church was not the space that you would bring those types of conversations to. We could heal us around, a bad relationship, or, if you losing somebody, those are things you could bring, but you couldn't bring in the fact that you were holding on to some unforgiveness of yourself around, again, decisions that you made in your past, or if you had been sexually assaulted. I didn't feel like that was a space for me. And it was in this movement that I was able to start to do that healing work, but then also see the importance of the healing that is so necessary for all of us when thinking about these issues. Because whether your work is solely rooted in LGBTQ liberation, or economic justice, or environmental justice, or wherever you feel your values are pulling you the most, I feel what's important for the reproductive justice movement is that we're kind of like the womb of the social justice movement, right? Because it gives us the opportunity to talk about our bodies that we are putting on the line for every other important, valuable thing that we're all committed to. And so for me, again, if we're not contending with that, if we're not putting that as the major kind of like forward-facing piece of our work, then we're missing out on a lot, right? And in so many of those opportunities, our people are suffering, right? So, and I've learned a long time ago in the UFCM movement, right, that whenever you get free, you got to free somebody else. And so that's why it has been so important for me in this work to do this and to make this a part of like how I want to do my work as a social justice activist in this world. What's also real for me, good folks, is that, I'm not trying to do no sermon, right? But when I was doing this work and thinking about what I want to share with you all, not only just about what reproductive justice is and why it's important for democracy and why this is a fight that we all need to be connected to, it took me to the word, right? Like this conversation took me to the word as well. And so I started to think about these different pieces of the word where I feel like there was a direct connection to reproductive justice. And one of the first stories that came to mind to me is the story of the woman with the issues of blood, right? And I was like, wait a minute, I've had many of my sister friends tell me about their issues with fibroids. They tell me about their issues, with their menstrual cycle. Like, we don't know, right, what the issue was, but to me, it sounds like a reproductive justice issue. And so I was like, wait a minute, this is actually something that's showing up in the word, good people. Like, it is a part of the work, and Jesus was there, right? For what we know, he's a cisgendered male, right? Like, being a part of that and supporting that woman through that experience. And so for me, there was a direct connection to the reproductive justice framework for me right there. When I think about the fact that Jesus was killed by the state, and his mother had to watch him, had to bury a child that was taken and slain by the state. It made me think about all of the young children that have been taken from us by the state. That is a reproductive justice issue. When I think about the beauty and the intimacy and the pleasure and all that comes up in the Song of Solomon, all the different ways that show up in the word, that is reproductive justice. And so I was able to find my work in the word, good folks. And so when I think about how our opposition in this work is always trying to throw the word back at us, it gave me such a feeling of just of comfort to know that my work is in the word, right? And that connection for me was absolutely life-changing for me, not only as a leader in this work, but as a person who's deeply rooted and connected to my spirituality. Now, the sexual and reproductive health field, though, unfortunately, has been led by white women, mainstream organizations and feminist organizations for a long, long time, right? And so when most people think about reproductive health and rights and all of that, they think about Planned Parenthood, they think about the NARALs, they think about these white women-led organizations, but they are not the ones leading the work, right? Solely by themselves. And it is this reproductive justice movement that is led by folks of color that is actually helping to transform the way that this work is done around reproductive health and rights in this country. And what we also know is that our opposition comes for people of color first, right, around this work. I don't know how many folks may have seen this a few years ago, but there were billboards put up across Georgia, and it went to other states. It said the most dangerous place for an African-American child is in the mother's womb, shaming Black women, saying that we were having too many abortions, right? They come for us in that way. They know that Black folks in particular, folks of color in general, are not having these conversations because they've been so taboo in our communities for so long. We don't talk about sex, we don't talk about bodies, we don't talk about any of that because we have not been trained or even encouraged to talk about that historically. And so they use these issues as wedge issues, which then translates into legislation, which then impacts our democracy. And so that's how I want you all to, I'm hoping that you can see the connections of this. They use these highly stigmatized, highly moral issues as a way to move their agenda. And this is how white supremacy continues to work and move their agenda forward, right? By pitting our communities against each other and trying to divide and conquer us from actually being connected and using our collective power to actually do our work of dismantling it. So by not centering these conversations in our communities, right? Our children don't get the comprehensive sex education that they need to be able to make their best decisions about their bodies. And we don't get the healing that we need, right? In our own communities to be able to continue to push forward in a way that gives us the ability to move closer to the liberation that we all want. Now, on December 1st, we have another abortion case going before the Supreme Court. Now, I want y'all to understand why this is important to our democracy, right? This Supreme Court, as it stands right now, was set up by the previous administration in a way that doesn't make progressive values the actual kind of like foundation for it, right? It is absolutely set up against us in all the ways. And so people think that, oh, another abortion case is going to the Supreme Court. They'll probably just do what they did before, right? But we don't have the same Supreme Court that we had before. We have one that is absolutely set up against us. And so what this does, if we lose abortion access in this country and Roe v. Wade is turned over, right? Then not only will our people, right, suffer the most. We know who suffered the most when Roe v. Wade was not in place in this country. We know who suffered the most when restrictions and access is denied, right, for our communities. It will be us, right? But the other thing that this opens the door for in terms of like why this is an issue of democracy is that it opens the door for white supremacists to use the courts to move us further away from liberation. Right? They have been doing a very calculated attack on reproductive rights in this country. And they're using it as a way to see that if it works here, it can work across all other issue areas. And so we have now gotten yet another abortion case because we just fought this in 2016 and won. And we are right back at the Supreme Court again. Right? In Georgia, we are right back in federal court against Kemp. In Sister Song, the organization I have the honor and privilege of leading, we are the lead plaintiff in this case against Governor Kemp, who in my opinion stole the election from Stacey Abrams. And so we are absolutely pushing, right? Pushing to make sure that our federal court doesn't put us in the same position as Texas. But this Mississippi case that's going before the Supreme Court absolutely opens the door for our democracy to be in jeopardy, good folks. So that is why it is important for us to understand why reproductive justice right now is one of the most critical pieces, right, for us right now, and why we need to be so committed and so connected to what is happening around it right now, because I'm telling you, our opposition is seeing this as a way to really move their agenda forward and to push us further away from liberation. Now, their agenda has been clear since the beginning, since they have for decades, right? We know what they're trying to do. And they know that they're targeting our bodies, they're targeting our wombs. They've always done that. But what they're not ready for, right? They know that we know how to get in the street and march. They know that we will, do what we need to do to raise our voices. And we've done that, right? And we'll continue to do that because it is important. But what I think is even more important right now is our collective action, meaning that we have to see ourselves connected as LGBTQ liberation folks, as folks who are doing work on the environment, as folks who are doing work on economic justice, as folks, the silos that we have been doing our social justice work in is not saving us. they will not save us. They will move us further again from the liberation that we want. And I believe, but it is possible for us to see liberation in our lifetime. But it is going to take all of us seeing the connections of our work, which is why, again, reproductive justice is so near and dear to me, to see those connections in order for us to really build the collective power that we need. We need clergy people saying that we are fighting for abortion access. We need LGBTQ folks saying, but I care about the environment. We need environmental justice people saying, but we know the environment is important, but if our people aren't getting paid the livable wages that they need, then it's impossible for them to really be on the front lines to ensure we got clean energy. We got to see how all of these things are connected to each other and for each other. And that is how we're going to get to what I believe is possible, again, liberation in our lifetime. So I want to be able to be in conversation with you all a little bit and be able to get some questions and to get some reactions to what I'm talking about, because there's not a lot of spaces, especially spaces that are rooted in spirituality, that we get to talk about these issues. I don't really get invited to church conferences to talk about, sexual and reproductive health. We ain't got there. We trying to get there, but we ain't got there. So you all, and what I feel is important, and which is why I've always loved this movement, is that it has been progressive and forward thinking enough to understand why we need to be bringing these conversations in. And I think it's important for the Unity Fellowship Church movement to be a beacon to other movements, denominations, to help them understand why we need to be centering these conversations right now. So I want to be able to get you all's reactions and to have some questions there. So I'll pause there and see if we can have that, and then I'll come back to talk about ways that you also can support and to really get connected to these issues.